Hello, I'm Dike Rostant. Welcome back to the TTT News. The saying, who feels it knows it, can play out with grave consequences when it comes to crafting a policy for a community outside of your direct lived experience. It is time to go in depth on the policy on persons with disabilities. And to do that, we are joined by Disability Affairs Specialist Tessa Pascall. Welcome, Tessa. How are you?
Good afternoon. I am fine, thank you. And you?
I'm all right, thank you, and looking forward to having this conversation because we were deferred a few times. But I want to start off with, though, asking what is the national policy on persons with disabilities?
So, let me give you a backstory. In 2005, the government of Trinidad and Tobago would have developed its first national policy on persons with disabilities. It would have had a 7-year action plan attached to that document. When that action plan ran out, the government started to review that policy. However, within the review period in 2015, the government of Trinidad and Tobago ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. And therefore, the new policy for persons with disability fell in line with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The action plan attached to this new policy is another plan. It basically is the framework that the government will use to meet its obligation under the Convention of the Right, or under the Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities. We would have looked at the convention and we reflected that in our policy. The aim of the policy is basically to ensure the human rights of persons and the inherent dignity of persons with disabilities throughout Trinidad and Tobago.
Now, you say throughout Trinidad and Tobago, but even before we get to geographic locations, what are some of those areas that are covered in the policy?
Well, the policy covers all the areas that the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability would have covered, some of which include accessibility, and that is access to transport, access to the built physical environment, access to information, and so forth. We also have access to justice. We have education, health, rehabilitation, and habilitation. We have care for persons with disabilities in the times of natural disasters and other disastrous events where they become more vulnerable. We look at independent living, which is a very important thing for persons with disabilities. We look at assistive aids and devices, and there are a number of other things that the policy would have addressed, including non-discrimination as well, equality of opportunity, children and women with disabilities.
And with that, I want you to break it down for me even more, please, Tessa. And I say that because sometimes we are not aware of what we are not aware about. So the same way we can tell somebody what you didn't see the traffic light, and the person will tell you that I'm colorblind. So they may not have been sure. What are some of those examples? Because you gave us different headings, but can you take some of those headings and give us specific examples, please?
Sure. So access, one of the biggest area of the policy. While there is an article that focuses on access, one of the biggest overarching tenets of both the convention and the policy is access, the need to create access, so that in building a website, it must be accessible to persons with visual impairment, like myself, who use speech technology. I must be able to go onto a website, log on, pull down a form, complete it, and return it to a business independently, right? I will not need to call you. What does this form say? And it breaks down me having to expose my information to a third party. who I may not even want involved in my business. You have things like access to the built physical environment, so that buildings where there are stairs but there are no ramps, or even buildings where you do have elevators but sometimes the elevators are not working. You have, Port of Spain is a perfect example of access and lack thereof. So you would have noticed in Port of Spain, or some people would have noticed, that they place these big yellow, it looks like pothole coverings, but they are not. They are textured additions to the pavement that tells a person with visual impairment that they are approaching a crossing, a zebra crossing, a safe space to cross. And you have pavements of varying heights. Some heights are extremely dangerous. We have pavements that do not necessarily have adequate ramp access or cut off, so that a ramp can seamlessly move from a wheelchair, can move seamlessly from the road onto the pavement, or vice versa. We have fire hydrants, light poles, and other obstacles in the pavement that obstructs not only someone who uses a wheelchair, but someone who is visually impaired, right? All those things are barriers to accessibility. That's physical access. Access to transport. You have persons who cannot use every mode of public transport available because they're in a wheelchair, so they may not be able to access the mainstream bus service, or they may not be able to, you do not have drivers who will be patient enough for them to get into a vehicle, help them fold up their wheelchair and put it into the trunk, take them to where they are. Normally, they will have to hire a vehicle to take them to and from somewhere. Those are things that the policy address in the area of access. In the area of access to justice, a police officer gives someone an instruction, the person doesn't obey. It doesn't automatically occur to the officer that this person may be deaf. They just assume that you are disobeying my instructions, right? You get hauled off to the police station, you are charged, and all this time you have no idea what is going on because everyone around you is speaking, but you cannot hear what is going on. And there are incidents where these things actually occur, right? So every aspect of the policy deals with issues that the community will have faced or is facing.
And they say sometimes when somebody from Trinbago telling the truth, they say before this, they say what they want to say, they say my paw is raised. And I really want to thank you, because I think this is one of the most pertinent bridges that we will have in this conversation, Tessa, because sometimes those blind spots, like I said, we're not even aware of the blind spots, far less to acknowledge them so that we can put a bridge over them so we can move past them. But we take a short break. When we return, we want to speak to the significance of a policy like this in Trinidad and Tobago. We are speaking with Disability Affairs Specialist Tessa Pascall. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. We are speaking with Disability Affairs Specialist Tessa Pascall, and we are speaking to the National Policy on Persons with Disabilities. Now, Tessa, what is the significance of a policy like this that is national in scope and takes everyone into account like this?
So the significance, of course, is the end product, which is to promote the human rights of persons with disabilities, as well as to secure their inherent dignity, but additionally, to make people aware that these are issues and they need to be addressed. The policy is not a social development policy. While we would have developed the policy is a government policy. Each ministry, each government agency within has a role to play. However, while the government has the legal responsibility, it is on every citizen, including the community of persons with disability, and the business community to ensure that what is outlined in this policy is achieved. Because we understand we don't have complete laws as yet, and laws take time. But we don't need a law to tell a business that persons with disabilities have money to spend. Let me make my premises accessible so that they can spend their money at my establishment.
But while
We
you
don't.
say there are laws being developed, sometimes it feels as though there's this clash between policy and personality. So one person might want your money, but they're saying, okay, well, they're spending anyhow, so I don't need to shift it up. Is there a monitoring element to a policy like this?
Of course. So one of the monitoring of this policy is done by an interagency committee. That committee is made up of ministries, government ministries. It's made up of NGOs that do work on behalf of the community of persons with disabilities, and it's made up of persons with disabilities themselves. The interagency committee is responsible for monitoring the implementation. So they get regular updates, they meet on a monthly basis and determine what additionally needs to be done, how can we go forward, what else can we do to ensure that the objectives outlined in this policy is achieved.
And looking forward, and I just keep on thinking that the awareness aspect, making individuals aware, is just so important, because you were breaking it down for us in the first half of the conversation, and I was thinking there's some streets that I don't like to walk on because I'm taller than some, and because there are trees in the middle of the pavement, and I need to duck and navigate, and I'm able to see them. So far less for someone who is not able to, but may remember, because the recall of individuals when you lose one sense is you see fantastic abilities other ways, but just being able to say, okay, well, that is an example and this makes so much more sense. But in terms of achievements, things that you're saying, okay, well, the policy has achieved this thus far, are there things that you can speak to like that?
Sure. So we would have achieved, obviously, everyone would have noticed that we no longer have the cotton money. And with implementing the new polymer note, we would have implemented tactile, or the government, not we, the government would have implemented tactile identifiers. And a lot of people say the money has Braille, but none of those symbols are actually Braille to symbol. It's just tactile, so that a person who is blind or low vision can actually feel those shapes and be able to tell the different denominations of notes that they have in their possession. They do not need someone now to separate money. What persons would have done before is they would have developed different folding methods so that each note is folded a different way, so that they know these are the 20s from the 100. That is not necessary anymore. A second really good one is the signing of the Marrakesh Treaty. The Marrakesh Treaty and the amendments to the copyright legislation, and this would have gone back to what I was saying before, legislation may take time, and that amendment to the copyright legislation now allows us, Trinidad and Tobago, to translate copyrighted material into accessible formats, whether that be large print, Braille, audio, or easy read for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise have some disability when interacting with print, right? And we are on the verge of signing an MOU with the Book Consortium and the International Intellectual Property Organization, in order to get access to a large catalog of copyrighted material that we can use. However, it is not that any and everybody could reproduce this and say they have authority to. NALIS is the agent authorized by the government to reproduce these copyrighted materials.
There's some really fantastic news that we're hearing from you, Tessa. But I'm wondering, though, because looking at monitoring of the implementation of the policy, you said that it is made up, that group is made up of different persons, intersectional, as it were. What kind of work does it take to advocate to have, okay, well, these new polymer notes, they have this tactile notifier. So you say, okay, well, these are the 10s, these are the ones. Is it just one group of people who is working tirelessly? Is it a group of people who are coming together? Are we just looking and saying, okay, well, this is what they're doing outside of Trinidad and Tobago, so let's do it here? What goes into making these kind of decisions?
No, it's definitely not one group. So right at present time, the government is the forerunner for disability advocacy in this country, disability progress in this country. In other countries, you tend to have the disability community doing so. However, while you may not see the community splashed out on the front page, they are quietly working in the background. So yes, you would have had government in taking a role in moving money from the cotton notes to the polymer notes, but you would also have had the community, different segments of the community, speaking with Ministry of Finance and Central Bank and other parties to push that agenda to get the notes breeled, right? To have those identifiers. Again, also with another one of our achievements is, and we would have all heard in the budget statement, or at least I hope we would have all heard, that come January 2022, there will be the removal of taxes and VAT, import taxes and VAT on assistive technology, assistive devices and aids for persons with disabilities. That, of course, yes, the government did have a role to play in that. It was one of the things that the interagency committee would have pushed, but it would have also had NGOs being involved with that. I remember when we were doing the listing, we would have sent out and asked the NGOs, okay, what it is your membership needs? What do they consider important on their list, right, that they will need tax exemptions for? And so even in terms of government, we don't just go out and come up with a policy. We always consult. The community has a saying, nothing for us without us. And we go out there and we consult them. It may not be the large scale consultation where you come into a room and you sit down and you have lunch and you spend all day. But there are ways that we consult with the community so that we can get feedback that we will be able to use when we develop policy, when we develop programs, when we provide service to the community.
And we want to thank you so much, Disability Affairs Specialist Tessa Pascall. And on behalf of our entire news team, we want to thank you for tuning in to this conversation. Thank you for joining us.